Hi everyone and welcome to Cinema4D Release 15. In this video I will introduce you to a range of new and updated features we made for this release, along with significant performance, workflow and usability improvements we made. I'm pretty sure you already noticed that we have some slight interface changes, we have some changes in naming convention, but interface changes are mostly of cosmetic nature. Now we will start with modeling enhancements, where I would like to introduce you to a concept of what I personally like to call a super tool. A new bevel tool is certainly a super tool by all standards. Now we wanted to bridge the gap between parametric and direct modeling, taking best from both worlds, since we believe that tools should really do the most of the work so you can concentrate on artistic side of the modeling process. This platonic object will certainly be a good candidate to showcase the possibilities of new bevel, so let me select all the edges, and the reason why it is good candidate is simply because it is consisted of triangles and has a lot of poles. So let's invoke our bevel tool, so default shortcut, and as you can see the tool has a plethora of options to define the surface characteristics, but they are conveniently grouped to improve readability. So we have options, we have shaping, we have topology, and here at the very end we have apply, new transform and reset values. Okay, pretty simple stuff. So let's start with this area here. Bevel tool has two modes, so chamfer and solid, and it also has free offset mode. So for example, in proportional you can create an offset based on percentage instead of, let's say, fixed distance. So let's apply a little bit of a bevel, maybe zoom in on the object so we can actually see the results. We have subdivision settings, which is pretty clear. We have depth, which is controlling the endpoints of this bevel, and both offset and depth can be controlled in viewport like this, and depth setting also now. We added a modifier key, so if you hold down the control key you can manipulate just one component. If that is not enough, you can simply control click and highlight the components you wish to manipulate. So very welcome addition to this bevel tool. Now everything stays parametric. As you can see, you are just influencing the selected components. You can of course deselect them by control clicking again. I'm pretty sure you already noticed that if I drag this guy a little bit too much, I can actually overlap the geometry. Maybe I will tune this down, it will be easier to see. So this is something that you probably don't want to do, and that's why we added this limit option. So it will simply prevent you from overlapping geometry. Of course, in shaping section you don't have to use default round shape for generated geometry. You can go with the user spline and do anything you want, or if you really need precise shapes, you can load up your own profile spline and choose appropriate profile plane. Okay, let's reset the tool before we go into topology section. Let me delete this platonic object because I want to use another object which will demonstrate the metering modes, and metering modes are actually various algorithms for doing a bevel. So let's first apply a small bevel, and of course you can limit this bevel so it won't overlap with the existing geometry. We can add some subdivisions on the fly, and as you can see here in the pole section of the sphere, you will probably want to use one of the three other algorithms for metering, because we are well aware that we cannot cover every single modeling situation with single algorithm. So these ones are adapted for specific usage. So one is for character modeling, one is more geared towards hard surface modeling, and essentially one of these four guys will simply create a geometry you will find to be appealing and consistent. So let's try uniform, and as you can see I simply resolved this issue here, and regardless of metering modes you can go into tweaking or sub-selection with control key. Now let's give this tool a little bit more difficult task. So I will select some random edges here. Let's invoke the bevel tool and let's reset it to default values. And as you can see, we'll add some subdivisions. We have results which may not be too appealing for you. So by changing these modes, you can find the appearance which you find the best. So for example, radial along with the ending options which define the endpoints of bevel, you can define the surface characteristics as you want. So let's try extend, and I don't think that this is appropriate for curved shapes like this one. So let's maybe try inset, and I think this is much better. The differences between algorithms are not very big, but in specific constellation of components, they will show their strength or weakness. Okay, maybe even this uniform inset would work pretty well here. Okay, now I want to show you, let's actually undo that, what happens if you bevel a point, because that is a very important concept now. So let's invoke the tool and reset and do a little bevel. The reason why I'm showing you this is because you can actually now define basic geometric shapes with this depth parameter. So currently we have a diamond-like shape. On 0% it would be rectangular shape, and on -100 it will be a circular shape. So very handy feature. Let me just get rid of this guy, and I will show you what happens when you bevel a face. So let's select a couple of faces here, maybe something like this, and when you run the tool, the contents will change a little bit to reflect the current component state. So we are in polygon mode, and now we have polygon extrusion options. So by dragging a handle, you will simply extrude, and you can adjust the extrusion, the curvature, and a lot more. So very powerful tool. It offers a lot of options, and it will surely bring parametric modeling to next level in Cinema4D. New slide tool can now work on multiple edges and much more. So let's create a simple object which will help us demonstrate those new features, and I will make it a little bit more coarse because it will help me show you one of the new features we have inside the slide tool. So let's convert the object, let's go to edge mode, and let's select maybe this loop. Now to access the tool, to simply use the old shortcut, and as you can see, we have exactly the same handles just as in bevel tool. So for consistency, we have an offset, and of course it works interactively in the viewport. We have limit, which simply prevents things from overlapping just as in bevel tool, and the new thing here is this shift parameter, and what it does is actually contracting or expanding the selection. Now the good thing about it is that you really don't have to go to Attribute Manager to adjust that shift. You can simply hold the Shift key and do that interactively in the viewport. So sliding without shift, shift is expansion and contraction. Of course, we have a very interesting option here called clone. So if we enable this guy, we will actually create a new edge loop. Now let's undo that. And I will turn off the clone because you can temporarily enable that if you hold the Control key. So you're actually copying the loops, and of course everything else works as expected. Let me undo that a couple of times. Now I'm sure you noticed this option here, preserve curvature, and that is very useful for organic modeling. So here I will hold the Control key first time without preserve curvature. As you can see, we have now interpolation of the surface. Let's undo that, and second time I will enable it, and now we have nice interpolation and we have actually a curved shape. I can show that once again here on maybe this edge. So nice curved sliding or extraction of the edges. It is also a good idea for me to mention that we have a proportional mode where you will actually work in percentage So you can then exactly define where your edge loop between two adjacent loops will be. Okay, very nice addition to release 15. Sculpting received a lot of attention for this release, and one of the goals was to bring to an end certain limitations and generally increase usability and boost overall workflow. Now, this model here is actually a scanned model. Now, the reason I'm using scanned model is to show you that all the sculpting tools now actually work on a regular polygon object. So you can do something like this. And there is one limitation removed. So now you can freely use all the sculpting brushes on regular polygon objects. Now we have a new amplify brush, which simply amplifies the existing detail on your model. So for example, if you want to emphasize this, you can do so with the amplify brush. It has the default mode, which deals with both crevice and ridge, or you can actually use just crevice. Let's maybe find one obvious crevice or something like this. It will just intensify the crevice or a ridge without you worrying about brush size or something like that. So a really neat addition to sculpt brushes. The second reason why I'm using this scan model is because I want to show you the reprojection options we now have for release 15. So in this case, our model, which is actually really bad from topological standpoint, is practically unusable. So you cannot rig that, and the brushes will probably behave oddly in certain areas. So for this kind of situations where you receive a bad model or you have a scan model, we have a complete reprojection functionality. So let me show you how that works. First condition that has to be met is that you want to build a low poly shape closely resembling the high polygon version. Now, the more precise this low poly shape, the better the result. So let's hit this project mesh. We will get a pop-up menu. So here, as a source, you of course want to use a scanned model because you want to transfer all the details from that high polygon model to low polygon mesh. What is pretty obvious now is that this low polygon version simply doesn't have enough geometry to accurately reflect this high density model. So that's why we have this subdivision level. So we will actually subdivide and propagate all the surface detail from scanned model to our low polygon mesh. So if I hit project, and I may warn you that this can be a little bit computationally intensive, but is absolutely worth waiting. And I would like to mention that it is a good idea to start with 2 or 3 levels of subdivision, because using higher values can really bog down your machine. So let's give it a couple of seconds more and we will see the result. Let's close this window and I will get rid of this low poly guy, and in fact I'll copy this material, unhide this original model, and let's actually spread them apart. And as you can see, they're identical. On occasions, depending on the complexity of the model, and I deliberately chose difficult situation, you can get artifacts like this, and most of the times that is easily solvable with just a little bit of smoothing. So you cannot get perfect result always, but you can get really good results. The advantage of this model is nice and uniform topology, which is also propagated through all subdivision levels. So you can in fact rig this, and in this state it is way more usable than this high density model. Okay, superb stuff. We actually get rid of this bust model. I will also change the display to garage shading, so we have a nice and clean representation. One thing that I really want to show you that makes me really happy is performance improvement. So let's hit subdivide couple of times. So now I'm at almost 900,000 polygons. If I hit subdivide once more, I will be around 3.5 million polygons. Now in release 14, I could spin around 5 to 6 million polygons and things would be really slow on this very same machine. So let me hit subdivide once more, and this will of course take time to subdivide 3.5 million polygons, and after a minute we have 14 million polygons on sculpt object in Cinema4D on the very same machine where I could barely spin 6 million polygons. Of course, things are a little bit slower, a little bit laggy, but you can actually still do a brush stroke. Now, many of you will ask me about system specifications, so you can see them here in the bottom left of the screen. And I think as far as performance is concerned, that is a major improvement over release 14. Of course, I'm also recording, which takes valuable computational power from the CPU, so very good performance increase. Okay, let's continue. I will delete this bust model because it's really heavy for the system. And let's unhide this dino guy, and let me show you some of the sculpt symmetry options we have now for release 15. We added this sculpt symmetry simply to resolve a lot of workflow related issues. So let me bring up this pop-up window, and here we have a couple of options, and let me actually select my grab brush and let's do a little bit of fun on this guy. So let's say that you sculpted some details on your mesh and that you simply forgot to turn on the symmetry. So in release 14 that was a problem because you didn't have a way to transfer the details from one side to another. So here we have that full possibility. So if you hit mirror object, it will simply mirror what is painted on one side to another based on this axis you set here. We actually get rid of all the details now. For mask, which also received a lot of attention, as you can see, we have additional commands. You can paint the mask and you can mirror that mask to another side. So very useful. Now this mirror layer, let's clear the mask. So suppose you have a layer with some details, and if you don't want to transfer all the information from all layers, you can simply mirror just the contents of that layer to another side. Okay, very useful. Let's delete this guy. Now often you will want to transfer just part of information, and we have a solution for that also. So if you create a mask, for example, let's say that I want to transfer just this, I can use this masked object option and I will transfer just the information inside the mask. Really cool addition. So let's clear the mask, and finally I want to show you something that is also really useful. So often you will have asymmetrical models, so strokes on one side simply won't correspond to strokes on another side, and you will want to do that just to avoid generic look. But what happens if you then want to equalize both sides? So we have this equalize guy which will simply find the sweet spot, and then both sides will be identical. I think these sculpt symmetry options we have for release 15 are a huge workflow booster. While we are talking about workflow improvements, it is good to mention that you can assign keyboard shortcuts to all these mirroring, symmetry draw mods and various commands. So for example, now for a pull brush, you can actually hit a keyboard shortcut which you can assign here in the command manager for brush preset. So if I hit A, then this brush preset will pop up and I can choose anything I want here and simply continue working as I want. Okay, so super cool addition to release 15. Now let's get rid of this dino guy because I want to show you new drawing modes which are very useful for hard surface sculpting. And let me tune down the smoothness. We will subdivide this a couple of times, and maybe we will even add a nice material from content browser like this. And let me show you new drawing modes. Let me switch to sculpting layers because that content browser is a little bit misleading. Let's reset the brush, and new drawing modes will actually help you do some hard surface sculpting. So we have a line, lasso, poly, and rectangle fill. So let's see what the line does. And you may guess it's actually a tool or a drawing mode to create nice and straight lines. Now you can finish the brush stroke with either double clicking or with right clicking. So let me right click, and this is what will happen. Cinema4D will simply draw that shape out. Let me delete the sculpting layer, maybe something like this. So doing straight lines is not a problem anymore. So you can create shapes like this, and I think that is very useful. Let me show you some other modes. We have a lasso fill, and maybe we'll crank this pressure up just to emphasize how this works. So any closed shape you do with a lasso fill will be created. So some sort of an island here. Again, if you want closed shape but with straight boundaries, you can use this polyfill. So it will fill out any polygon shape you create. Okay, so something like this, very useful. We also have rectangle fill, and that actually works pretty simple. So you will just create rectangles with that drawing mode. So very helpful and very nice additions to this version. Now I just want to mention that baking is now improved. We have various smaller additions throughout these brushes which you can check out. Also, if you are dealing with character animation, it's a good idea to know that you can create morph targets on your pose morph with all the brush tools. And for programming geeks out there, all sculpt brushes except mask and smooth are now developed against a new brush API. So this allows any user to create their own C++ based sculpt brushes. That's it as far as the sculpting improvements are concerned. For this release, we added a grass shader, which will provide you with a very easy way to create grass. Now, let's create maybe a simple object and convert it. I'll grab my magnet brush and maybe deform this surface a little bit. And now, to add grass, simply use this menu and hit this little grow grass. You will receive a tag and a simple material. Now there is no visual indication in the viewport that grass is in fact on this object, but once you render it, you will notice that it's there. Of course, it works with the physical renderer also. A little bit different result, and you have a dedicated grass shader. So you can maybe change colors like this. So anything you want and find pleasing, maybe change the length of the grass, the width of the blade, the density, and achieve completely different results. So something like this, which is a very nice and fast way to create grass, mainly for architectural visualizations. Now I just want to mention that grass works with sculpted objects, which many of you will appreciate. So let's create a grass shader like this and render it just to verify that fact. Okay, very nice and neat way to create grass surfaces. So feel free to create various landscapes with the help of sculpt brushes. In release 15 we have a complete dedicated texture asset manager, and it will really put a smile on your face because it's so easy to work with your assets now. So here I have a simple deck of cards. As you can see, they are simply dealt on this semicircular shape. Now let me open my material, and as you can see here I have a MoGraph multi-shader, and it has 52 materials. Now they're missing because I either copied this and didn't move the texture folder, I received this file, or used a network drive, or any other reason you can think of why textures are missing. So now, instead of manually relinking all these guys, you simply run the texture manager, and here we have a complete dedicated texture asset management system. Now let me show you just one simple thing that you will probably use. So here I can simply select all with Ctrl A, and under Edit menu hit Relink Textures. I know they are located in this folder, although you can easily select the complete disk, and the texture manager will simply search for the textures on complete hard drive. So I select the folder, and that's it. They are all relinked and you can easily continue working with your scene. Okay, so very nice addition to release 15. It has a couple of more interesting features in it, so I suggest you discover them on your own. Major addition to text generators in Cinema4D for this version is kerning. So both spline, this spline text, and mode text can be manipulated per letter as you wish. So here that we have a kerning option, so let's enable that 3D graphical user interface, and as you can see we have a kerning gizmos in the viewport, and as you can see here we have quite a few parameters, but let's rather explore them directly in the viewport because most of them except reset buttons are available directly. So let's type something meaningful. So Maxon, and you can select any of these characters via this gizmo and adjust it as you wish. So you can move it like this from side to side, you can pull it upwards, you can scale it with this little gizmo, you can scale it non-proportionally like this, and of course do that with any other letter you want. So this gives you a lot of creative freedom, preserving all the parametric benefits of mode text or regular text spline. Let me just show you those options which are not available directly in the viewport. So we have a reset selected and we have a reset all. So very simple stuff, and I'm pretty sure you will find this kerning to be extremely useful, and that it will certainly make typographical tasks in Cinema4D much easier. Rendering received special attention for this release, and I'm particularly happy that I will show you those. For this version we have extensive performance improvements. Global illumination is in all versions now. Yes, that includes Prime version. Hair rendering with physical renderer is improved and can be cached now, among many other things. We have a completely new ray tracing engine in Cinema4D now, which is called Embry, which I will show you in a couple of moments. We have a completely new and rewritten Irradiance Cache 2.0. We have a improved ambient occlusion, which can also be cached now. We have a light mapping, which is a fantastic secondary global illumination method. I will show you that in this very same video. We have improved performance when rendering subsurface scattering shader, and subpolygon displacements now render very fast with physical renderer as opposed to release 14 where rendering SPD was quite slow. Blurring effects render much faster now, and generally the interface, the workflow and presets are simplified, because we wanted to take out the most of technical precondition that had to be met to use render engine successfully. Now, since there are so many things that are new, we could spend hours talking about improvements and new features, but I think it is a better idea to show you the results of those upgrades on a couple of scenes, so you can see the revamped rendering in action, and you can also keep this release 15 feature video on the short side. So let's open our render settings, and here under physical render engine, which as far as appearance wise stayed practically the same, we have an advanced tab, and here is where you actually can choose your ray tracing engine, and I suggest you keep this at Embry faster. This physical here is mainly for compatibility with older scenes. Now, some of you probably noticed this theme render, and we will cover that in later stages of this video, but we will now concentrate on rendering improvements. Now let's add global illumination, and here, as you can see, the interface is simplified, especially when it comes to irradiance cache, so you can set the record density and simply forget it. Now under general we have two primary methods, so once again simplification as much as possible. This legacy is for older scenes that you will load into release 15, and under secondary method we have aside to QMC and irradiance cache and these radiosity maps from release 14, we have a star of the show which is called light mapping. So if I enable this guy, I'll receive a dedicated light mapping tab. Now if you're not experienced, you can simply leave it at default, and in 99% of cases your render will come out just fine. Now let's talk a little bit about why this scene shouldn't really render fast. First of all, we have a decent amount of polygons, which will make the render a bit slower. We have subsurface scattering material, which is slow by itself, especially when you have short path length, so everything in this scene is made deliberately to slow the render engine down. Now under reflection we have blurriness, so this will also contribute to slower rendering. Under render settings we actually increased the subdivisions for shadows and for subsurface scattering. Okay, so for these two area lights, shadow density and subdivision is increased. So by all standards, this scene in this resolution, so 1000 by 800, which is actually the largest resolution I could fit into this recording screen and keep reasonable appearance, is decent enough to show you the power of Embry, new irradiance cache and light mapping. So let me show you the workflow. You will simply add global illumination. You can set both samples here in general tab and record density for irradiance cache to low. You can choose the method to be light mapping, and that's it. You can simply hit render now. So let's see how much it will take for this image to render, and please keep in mind that I'm also recording and that things will be a little bit slower because of that. So we already finished with light mapping and irradiance cache and subsurface scattering, and look at it go. It's really fast. It's amazingly fast how it can render all those effects combined on this resolution. You can see we are 27 seconds in render. So let's see how much it will take for the complete image to render out. One minute and 2 seconds. That is really amazing results, and that is why I'm so happy that I can show you rendering with release 15. So, and this combination of new irradiance cache with light mapping, where you have Embry as a ray tracing engine, is a really powerful combination, and it scales really well. So let's try something a little bit more serious. So let's go maybe into print resolution, so times 3, and that is a significantly larger image. So let's see how much it will take for this guy to render on this resolution. So I will hit render, and I will resize this image here just visually in the picture viewer, so we can actually see the complete render once it finishes. And I will of course pause the video and will be back once it is done. Here we are after 8 minutes and 7 seconds, and the rendering engine scales really well because it's modern and multi-threaded in its core. Now let me show you some simple math to some of you that may think that 8 minutes is too much based on this first result for this resolution. So here we have a calculator, and let's see how many pixels we have in this first render. So 1000 by 800 is, you already guessed, 800,000. And let's see the result for our second render. So how many pixels there are in this resolution? So 3000 times 2400, and that's 7,200,000 pixels for render engine to calculate. Now the first result was 800,000, and if we simply divide those two guys like this, I hope this math stuff is not boring, so equals, that means 9 times more pixels or more data to process than in this original image. And judging by the time the render engine took, the result is in fact astonishing. So we didn't have to use 9 minutes to finish this render. Here we are in typical architectural scene, and this scene by all standards shouldn't render fast. So the first reason is because it has so many objects. We have an object which represents the leaves of this tree, which by itself has more than 500,000 polygons. Another reason is we have a large reflective surface. We have a sub-polygon displacement on this complete wall. We have cloned objects. We have really high resolution textures, so from 50 or more megabytes per texture, and we have a sky object with HDR image and an area light also. So nobody would really expect from this scene to be rendered quickly. So let's see what our light mapping with irradiance cache and Embry renderer can do in this situation. So let me just make sure we have no caches, otherwise the calculation will not be done from scratch. So let's hit render and see what do we have. We have a light mapping progress, pre-pass, as you can see. Then we have irradiance cache doing its magic, and this image is 1200 by 750, so moderate resolution, and I chose it simply because it is the highest resolution that can fit in this recording window, and I'm pretty sure you can see that Embry is running like crazy, and this thing will render in a minute or so. And as you can see, we have a nice color bleeding throughout the scene. The things look really well, and this is a typical scene or everyday scene you will encounter when working with Cinema4D, and I think it accurately reflects the capabilities and improvements we made for this release. Okay, so let's give it a little bit more time. Just hope that video compression won't destroy the details, and here we are, 1 minute and 11 seconds. That is superb result. Let me just scale this window a little bit so you can maybe see this resolution information, and what I will do now, and briefly pause the video, is simply increase the resolution to something really high. So let's go maybe by times 3. So this is very high resolution, so let's give it a shot and see how will our render engine manage. So Shift R, I will of course set this to 25% so the image is inside picture viewer, and let me briefly pause the video and I will be right back once this image renders. And here we are after 7 minutes and 4 seconds. Let me just pull this guy a little bit, and as you can see we have very good scaling. So this image is in fact huge, so you can see all the details and that displacement and color bleeding and all those beautiful details from the textures. Okay, let's go to our next scene. Here we are in a typical interior scene, and this scene, by all standards, shouldn't really render fast due to a couple of reasons. Well, the first reason is we have, aside to these two area lights with area shadows, we have a constellation of little lights here, which you will see render, and also here in this closet area. Now, the second reason is we have blurred reflection for almost any object in the scene. So that includes this large floor surface, this bathtub, this toilet, this metal parts throughout the scene, and we also have glass surfaces and mirror-like surfaces. So this will all contribute to longer rendering. Of course, we are also using high-resolution textures for these wall tiles and for the floor, and even for this wooden construction here. So let me show you how we will render this, and this is exactly what you should do in real production until you gain some knowledge about Embry and light mapping and how to optimize your renders even more. So here we have a fixed number of samples, we have free sampling subdivisions, and also, aside to all that I've mentioned before, we have increased this blurriness subdivision and shadow subdivision because we want to have really nice representation. But of course, this will cost us render time. So let's see what our new ray tracer can do coupled with the new irradiance cache and with light mapping. Here we will leave everything at default, so we won't optimize anything. Irradiance cache, let's leave it at default. Here under light mapping, because I'm actually aiming for the fastest render and I don't want to use a really high path count here because that can lead to longer render times. I will actually pre-filter the light map, and that means I will interpolate between samples. That of course means that I have to use an interpolation method, and I suggest this nearest, and also I will use that light map to build radiosity map, which will be then subsequently used by irradiance cache for much faster rendering. So let's hit render and see how much it takes for this image to be rendered. I will leave the video running, but in post-production I will speed it up so we can reach the end in a couple of seconds. And here we are after 3 minutes and 56 seconds, as you can see, and we have a really nice image with blurred reflections, with all that nice details, and it rendered really fast regardless of the number of lights. Pretty good demonstration of the Embry with new irradiance cache and light mapping. Now I want to show you ambient occlusion, which also received a performance improvement, and of course you can also cache it. Now when you are in this situation, when you actually compute it, the light map, the irradiance cache, and you can simply enable this auto load options, because you don't want to calculate this all over again since it is not necessary. So let's add ambient occlusion. The basic tab is pretty much the same, and I suspect that leaving the contrast to 0 will simply result in a too dark ambient occlusion. It will look unnatural, so let me put something like minus 50% here, and Under cache, I will simply enable the cache and maybe even for fun, let's double that value so we have a nice ambient occlusion. So let me render that again. And you will see all that pre-computed caches are used, and once the AO or ambient occlusion calculates, and you can see it's really fast with this version, you can also reuse it all over again if you want to increase the resolution or something like that. So let me speed up the video a little bit until this render finishes. And here we are after 3 minutes and 44 seconds, and let me select this first image and do an A-B compare. So ambient occlusion can actually help you create better perception of depth and self-shadowing, and sometimes it's making the image look better, sometimes not. So anything that works for you is just fine. Now, let me just close this. You have a cached solution, so you have ambient occlusion that can be reused. So you can check this auto load, and subsequently any increase in resolution will be in fact rendered much faster than without cached solution. Now I could talk all day about render improvements, but really to keep the video on the shorter side, I will just once again sum it up for you. So we have a completely new ray tracer called Embry. We have completely rewritten irradiance cache. Everything in render engine has been improved and optimized, and we have a light mapping, which is a fantastic secondary method for global illumination. Team Render is a completely new network rendering solution that replaces old net rendering. There are many advantages to new Team Render, and let's briefly cover some of them. And in my opinion, the most important one is distributed rendering, which actually means you can render a single image over the network of machines. Other one is really simple one-click rendering over the network, which includes all the assets. Data is transferred between client machines seamlessly. It's easy to use. Render results are instantly delivered to picture viewer, and you can use render queue to prioritize render jobs, and no dedicated server or administration is needed to use Team Render successfully. Now, it is worth mentioning that Team Render distributes all kinds of caches automatically, so global illumination caches, light maps, ambient occlusion, and so on and so forth. Important notice for Windows users is that you have to install Bonjour service, which you can download from Apple website, and the procedure is really simple and it is described in help system. Now Cinema4D has to know that you want to use Team Render, so you have to instruct it here under Renderer, Team Renderer, and simply enable this checkbox here. Of course, you want to give your computer a name so it's easily recognizable on the list of available render machines, and you can give it a security token, and I chose a simple one for this demonstration. To see the list of available machines, you can choose this Team Render Machines, and as you can see, I have additional machine which I will use to render this scene into picture viewer. Now I just want to mention that this scene is actually really heavy scene because it contains very complex materials including subpolygon displacement, luminance channel with layered materials including subsurface scattering, and we have depth of field, and I just slightly modified the scene, and this is seen from content browser, where I in fact changed the primary method to new irradiance cache, secondary to light mapping, and we have switched this to Embry with some slight modifications. Let's see how we can render this to picture viewer. So Team Render to picture viewer, and render will start utilizing all the machines we chose for render. Completely hassle-free, and it's deeply integrated. Now let me just speed up the video until this is finished, and we will see how much time it takes for the image to render. And here we are after 3 minutes and 40 seconds, and with the help of another machine we have this nice rendered image, and as you can see it is rendered quite fast with all the details including subpolygon displacement and depth of field and subsurface scattering. Now let me close this and mention that Team Render is now integrated also in Render Queue, so you will manage your renders from there, and there is no need to install full Cinema4D license on another machine. You can install just the Team Render client, or if you already have Cinema4D installed, you can simply rename the Cinema4D executable file to include word client in it. So regardless of what you name it, it should include the word client, and it will be simply started in the Team Render mode. Team Render is great. I could really go into depth about it, but we really want to keep this video as short as possible. Release 15 has a lot of performance improvements under the hood, and I think it would be a good idea to finish the video with showing some of those performance improvements. Ones among you with a keen eye will actually notice that I am inside release 14 at the moment, and that is because we want to compare performance between two versions. Here I loaded a simple MoGraph scene, and that is to demonstrate the improvements we made for fracture object. And as you can see, we have a plane that is disconnected, which is affected with deformer, and then we're exploding the segments and applying a random effector. The trouble is, in release 14 this is really slow, and in general fracture object was really slow, so as you can see the playback is problematic. So let's go back, and in fact in Cinema4D there is a tool under commands which is called calculate FPS, where FPS stands for frames per second. So if you type CA, that command will be filtered out. So let's open it and do an animation test, which will give us the exact frames per second for this scene in release 14. So let's give it a shot. And we have roughly 5 frames per second. Now let me close this release 14 and I will load exactly the same scene in release 15. You can see immediately that we have much faster playback, and let's measure the performance here. So CA, calculate FPS, and let's hit animation test, and here we have 18 frames per second. That is 300% improvement over the old fracture object in release 14. There are numerous other improvements, including smaller features we added for release 15, so just want to mention something I feel that it is really important, and that is that FBX import and export is greatly improved with release 15. We have camera crane, we have a lot of little improvements, but I think you will have to discover them on your own, simply because this video is already quite long, and I really don't want to rob you out from the joy of finding a nice new feature or improvement by yourself. That's it. I hope you will enjoy release 15.